Welcome, everybody. My name is Carolyn Dubé. I'm the Executive Director at Fertility Matters Canada, and I am welcoming you here today for another Figuring Out Fertility series, where we speak to fertility experts across Canada and now across the globe to bring you information about your fertility journey to help you along the way. And I'm thrilled to be here with Dr. Tanya Wild from Alive Holistic Health Clinic in Toronto. She's a naturopathic doctor, and she's going to talk to us about PCOS specifically and the benefits of intermittent fasting and how that can help your fertility journey when you do have PCOS, and probably even for other people who may not have PCOS but are interested in learning more about intermittent fasting. So Dr. Wild, I hand it over to you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. And I want to start first by saying you guys are awesome and everything you stand for. So thank you for being there for all of us individuals who have suffered through subfertility, because I went through my own journey of subfertility. It took me 8 years to have two children. And so I always like to share that. And I love your association, everything it stands for. Yeah, because you need to be there for people like us. Yes, for me. Yeah, for sure. So 70% of women with PCOS struggle with subfertility. And I was one of those individuals. And intermittent fasting is an inexpensive, effective way to help a woman with PCOS ovulate more regularly. In the case, if she's overweight, lose weight, balance her hormones, reduce her testosterone, which is the androgen we often think of as the male hormone, but it's actually a woman's hormone too. And it can be high in a woman with PCOS. That's actually one of the diagnostics that we look at. And it can also help reduce her insulin and regulate her blood sugars, all which would help her reproductive health. You just have to do it in a way that's supervised and initially, because you don't want to just jump into something new without kind of having some kind of advice. And I'm going to give you as much information today as possible to kind of get you thinking about it and considering a way that it might work for you as an individual. If it's, the factors of you have insulin resistance, perhaps you are overweight, or have been told that, perhaps ovulation can be regulated through doing intermittent fasting. I'm just going to give you all the little tips that might help you get started.
That's awesome.
So what is intermittent fasting, first of all? So how would you define it as an individual who,
so I've been doing my own research on intermittent fasting, and I've actually been doing it for several months.
Because it can help everyone. And just before we got on here, you said you don't have polycystic ovary syndrome. No. But it can be applied to a lot of people beyond the reproductive years and beyond the condition of PCOS and insulin resistance. So tell me, what is your experience with it? I'm curious.
So it's been really, I wasn't sure how I was going to like it. And I actually got into it because of COVID, and I was trying to, make sure I was maintaining my own personal blood sugars. And as I, and I thought, this might be a way for me to not have to go on a diet, but make, because I was trying to also maintain my COVID pounds. And so I had done some research, and so kind of eating within a certain window during the day, and then fasting for another chunk of period. The day.
Exactly. So it's a lifestyle involving specific times to eat and not to eat or fast to improve your health and your metabolic parameters. So a lot of people will do it in a chunk of 16/8. So where they might consider fasting for 16 hours. And we usually look at the nighttime sleeping hours to add to that 16-hour chunk, and eat within an 8-hour window. But it's really key to make an intentional fasting. And also when you're supposed to eat. Because it's easy to go, I'm going to fast for 16 hours. And maybe you stop eating at 8 p.m. and then you go to 12 p.m. and suddenly you're in meetings or you're working and you haven't eaten to break your fast. And then you can go into unintentional fasting, can be very stressful. So it's not very helpful. So it's really important to make that fasting intentional, number one. Number two, find a window that makes sense for you as an individual, depending on your lifestyle, because perhaps you're somebody who wakes up super early and you want to fast, as this one study I'm about to share, between 2 p.m. and then 7 a.m. So maybe you want to do an earlier cutoff and fast all through the day and go to bed earlier. Or someone like me, you break the fast at 11 a.m. and then be done around 7 p.m. is the last meal. And it's helpful to do it, like you'll get better benefits from it if you do it more regularly, but it does not engraved in stone once you start that you have to do it every single day. It is going to be more helpful if you have, for example, type 2 diabetes, and you're trying to get the best results to do it every day. And if you're trying to lose weight, but there's always that flexibility. You don't have to be perfect. So
that's really important to know. That was one of my questions when I had initially started. Do I have to do this every day in order for it to, what if I want to go out for dinner on Saturday night with friends and have some drinks, and what do I do then?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. So what I would recommend in that circumstance is either you just start fresh the next day, or you can push your fast later. So let's say you cut off at 10 and normally the next day you would be eating at noon. Well, you can start eating at 2 p.m. You can extend the fast the next day. You have a 6-hour eating window, or you just say, okay, that was a one-off. And then tomorrow I'm going to start at 12 p.m. again, and it's reset. Yeah.
That's great advice.
Yeah. So thank you. So it's important to not be too rigid about these changes. And personally, I started this intermittent fasting back in 2018, and it wasn't an overnight, I'm going to just start fasting and boom, I'm great. I guess because I have polycystic ovary syndrome, and I'd already starting to see, my fasting glucose creep up, something called a HbA1c or glycated hemoglobin start to creep up. The normal range is between, you want your A1C or the 3-month sugar average to show under 5.5, and mine was 5.6. So I was like, oh my goodness. And I didn't have much, I was healthy weight, and I thought, okay, what am I going to do about this? And I was past the fertility years, but I'm like, I got to stay healthy, because apparently with PCOS, 50% of women develop type 2 diabetes by the time they are age 40.
Wow.
So it's a big number.
That's a big statistic.
And 1 in 3 Canadians have prediabetes or at risk for type 2 diabetes. So it goes beyond women with PCOS. It's an epidemic.
Definitely.
So I think it's super helpful, easy tool. And a lot of cultures, people fast. So it's not that new. It's just that this is like a more structured way to help. And the concept behind how it works is that if you're constantly eating, your pancreas is pumping out insulin, and your pancreas doesn't get a break. And the way the insulin hormone works is it binds to these receptors in your cells. Your tissues, your organs start to use the sugar when you get the proper insulin hormone response. But if those little receptors, or I like to call them locks, if the insulin hormone is the key, if those receptors are damaged or resistant, then the sugar where does it go? Where does that sugar go?
Oh, back into your bloodstream?
And then it can bind to fats and become triglycerides, which we don't want to have elevated levels, because that contributes to the overall cholesterol panel, like high lipids. But it can also turn into fat. So we want to give our pancreas a nice break to keep our insulin receptors healthy. So that's another reason. That's the biggest reason we do the the intermittent fasting, so that we can give our pancreas a break and support our insulin receptors. And that's what insulin resistance is, because a lot of people don't know what is insulin resistance, right? It's when the receptors aren't listening to the insulin hormone, and instead of the sugar getting used by our brain and our muscles and our tissues, our cells, we basically store that sugar as fat, and sometimes it even infiltrates around the liver, and we get fatty liver.
Okay. Now, is insulin resistance something that we can reverse, or is the damage done? Oh, great. Okay.
No, we can. The only time that it's not reversible is if you've developed type 1 diabetes, where you're now insulin dependent.
Okay.
But you can still, actually, interesting enough, you can be type 1 diabetic and then later in life develop type 2 diabetes, because type 1 diabetes is when your pancreas is attacked by your immune system and the pancreas isn't working anymore. But the cells over time, if you're using a lot of insulin hormone, then those receptors also can become resistant. So you also want to try to keep the amount of insulin hormone that you're using on the down low, right? And try to use the least amount by eating healthy. I'd remind you, if you have type 1 diabetes, highly strongly recommend you definitely speak to a professional before doing intermittent fasting and figuring out strategies around that, because it's very different. But with type 2 diabetes, definitely something you can implement with the advice of a healthcare practitioner too. So really interesting was this study that they did with a group of people, so human study. They divided the group into two, both the major group before they divided it had imbalanced metabolic parameters. So they had insulin resistance, or they were on their way to type 2 diabetes, so pre-diabetic. They had elevated waist circumference or big waist circumferences, elevated lipids, so like high cholesterol. They had so high insulin on rising, which is an starting indication of insulin resistance. And they essentially they were overweight. They divided the group into two groups. They both followed the standard American diet, so it wasn't exactly healthy. We call it the SAD diet, right? So they weren't necessarily eating healthy either group, but the group that was fasting reversed all those unhealthy metabolic parameters compared to the group who ate randomly throughout the day. So same number of calories, neither group lost weight, but the group who followed the intermittent fasting ended up having a shift in their body composition. So their fat went down, their muscle mass went up, they lost inches around their waist.
Wow.
And they improved their lipids to normal. They reversed their, you're asking, can you reverse insulin resistance? They reversed that. And so their blood sugars became normal, their insulin hormone became normal, and their blood pressure was the other one, the parameter that improved as well. So it's kind of neat, right? So all they did was intermittent fasting. The window that they were eating was really early. It was like 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. And I thought, oh, I'm definitely can't do that. But so that depends on your lifestyle. Really important to find a window that works. So
yeah. Oh, wow. That's so interesting. So there's like at the end of this, or because of the intervention, they became healthier.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Gosh, that's amazing news.
And yes, absolutely. And women with polycystic ovary syndrome aren't always overweight, but the women who are can really benefit from it, or women with fertility struggles who have type 2 diabetes.
It's just that this is that's my
no problem. A little bit of a delay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the face, sorry, no wrong. I can hear myself. It's all good. So basically, it can be helpful for women with subfertility. I like to say subfertility instead of infertility because it implies that you'll never get pregnant. And subfertility is like you just delayed in getting pregnant, and it kept me motivated and happy when I was going through my own journey to say that I was subfertile. So women with subfertility and polycystic ovary syndrome can benefit, especially if they have pounds to lose. But you can do it safely, even as a woman who has a healthy weight, if you're starting to have insulin resistance and you have like a delay in ovulation or irregular menstrual cycles, as long as you eat enough calories to maintain your weight in the eating window, because you don't want to have such a low fat that you can't store your reproductive hormones.
Of course.
So it's important to look at that. And what's also helpful is to kind of explain, like, why does even insulin resistance affect, or in what way does insulin resistance affect women with PCOS? Basically, the bottom line with that is that we have seen that insulin resistance is what drives up the testosterone. So those androgens that are causing the delay in ovulation, a woman produces testosterone excess from her ovaries when she has insulin resistance. Okay. So if you manage the insulin resistance and use tools that helps with that, your testosterone, your androgens will come down, and you're more likely to ovulate regularly. So
awesome news. So that's amazing news for PCOS, because we do see that in our online support groups a lot, that struggle with PCOS and irregularities, and patients looking for support or information to help them figure out how to get things back on track, or at least a little bit more on track.
Yes.
That's okay.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay, so we know what intermittent fasting is. So for people who are thinking, okay, I've got PCOS or I don't, but I'd like to take advantage of this to, get more healthy, to prepare my body for an upcoming treatment cycle, or you're even potentially in the middle of a cycle and you want to prepare for potential pregnancy, where would someone get started? So how would a patient, where do they start? Because when I was looking at it, I was like, oh gosh, other than sort of Googling and asking friends who knew, what would be your advice for people to kind of like a starting point?
So always seek help from your professional to make sure that it's something that, it's considered safe for you. In the middle of a treatment cycle, I don't know if I would advise any like drastic changes because, the hormones could get affected let's say you're doing IVF or injectables that could impact the dosing. It does often, because you're ovulating more regularly, hormonal shifts are happening, and people often don't think about they think about the reproductive hormones, their estrogen and progesterone as the only hormones. They forget that thyroid hormones, insulin hormone, cortisol hormone, they all play a role. So it's like basically the endocrine system, right? So your thyroid metabolism, your pancreas insulin, your cortisol from your adrenals, and they all interplay with your reproductive hormones. So making a big change like that in the middle of a treatment cycle, I don't know if I would advise it, but if you've been instructed to perhaps lose weight, or you're preparing over a 3-month cycle you're trying to support your antral follicles, we call them. So like the eggs are developing over a 3-month maturation. You're trying to support those eggs perhaps before a treatment cycle, and you've been instructed to drop weight. You can start really simply by saying, you know what, I'm not going to eat after dinner, and then go till breakfast the next morning, whatever time you normally eat. And then from there, you can make the little simple shift of, okay, I can do this for a while. I've, stopped eating after dinner. And sometimes that's really hard for people because with PCOS, because we have higher hormones that kind of make us really hungry all the time. So it's, for me, starting this was challenging because I was starving through the night. And so then I realized, okay, I got to do it very slowly. So I realized I was doing fasting normally 12 hours. And so I would just add an hour of fasting slapped onto the nighttime. So cut off the nighttime snack, but make it a little bit earlier and just keep winding backwards by an hour, and then pushing out the morning breakfast, by an hour. And you could do that weekly, you could do that monthly, whatever feels comfortable. If you're really been instructed to drop weight and you want to see a bigger shift and you feel comfortable with it, you could do jump into the 16-hour fasting, just recognizing that you'll want to at first, before your body, actually the interesting thing with that study showed that your body does adapt and your appetite does go drastically down once you start doing the intermittent fasting. You don't have that evening appetite. Mind you, the population that was studied wasn't women with PCOS. So it's important to note that it may be different, and strategies that you can do is make herbal tea popsicles, electrolytes without sugar, coffee in the morning black, things that will help, distract you a little bit and also support those sugar lows. So what happens often with women with PCOS is that with your insulin being kind of pumping out high in the morning, first, your body does make a meal from your glycogen stores in the liver. So it's not like, even though you feel like you're going to die, you're not going to die. Like your body will make the sugar it'll put the sugar into the blood. So you basically kind of feel like after a little while you feel normal, but that transition time can be very uncomfortable. The next transition is from that to your body now using your fat stores. So it's great if you're trying to drop weight. But if you're not, then it can be a little bit awkward. So working out or moving, shaking a water bottle if you're at your desk, just to again create more sugars from your glycogen in your liver. But movement, we often think, if I work out, I'll feel worse. It's actually the opposite. So movement helps with those transitions.
I found that. So when I started this back, I guess really it was in the spring, I had started walking because all the gyms had shut down. So I said, this might be a good time. And I always thought, oh gosh, I could never do a workout, like a heavy workout after fasting. And I didn't have the opportunity to try it because I didn't have a gym to go to at that point. But I always found that if the mornings I missed my walk, I was more hungry.
Right.
Yeah, it was shocking. So now that you're saying that, it makes sense. Yeah.
Yes. And how is your evening appetite? Did you find that after doing the fasting for a while, it was easier to not eat after dinner?
I would say, and I had a later. So what I would do is go, I think I usually cut off around 8. And I'd have sort of more of a try to have something more high protein at night, because I feel like that sort of held me over more versus just having some popcorn or something that didn't really stick.
Yes.
And then I was trying to push it from, I think I did sort of 8 till 11 or 12 the next day. I usually get to about 11:45, and then that was sort of my I'm done. But the evening, it wasn't too bad. And I did, tea does definitely help me. And it also forced me into drinking a lot more water.
Yes, yes, that's the other thing that's really helpful. Drink a ton of water through your fasting time. Obviously, cut off an hour before bed so you're not peeing all night, but in the morning, definitely lots of fluids, herbal teas, and coffee. If you're a coffee drinker, don't drink too much coffee because that dehydrates you, and especially if you're going through fertility treatments or you're trying to get pregnant in general, you don't want to have more than 150 milligrams of caffeine a day because that can compromise your fertility. So yeah, so it's interesting that you're saying that the appetite did go down, and I definitely found that it was a lot easier. And even now, what I found is in the past that I would get hypoglycemic attacks even when I wasn't intermittent fasting, and I would just get really shaky if I wasn't eating every 3 hours. Now I can, not that I advise it in the cases of women who have a healthy weight, but I've just tested the waters because I read parts of Dr. Jason Fung's The Obesity Code, and he talks about when you that 24-hour fasts can be safe for an individual with obesity and trying to lose weight. So I was like, okay, let's see how this feels. So I did a 24-hour intentional fast. I also did a 24 unintentional fast, and it's a huge difference. It does not feel good. So when you do fasting for longer periods, it's helpful to have an app to monitor you. But what I noticed is that don't get hypoglycemic attacks that can go for very long periods. I do stress, though, it's so important to eat healthy, balanced meals and make sure that you can make the time for that. Prep in the mornings to support you so that you have the meals ready. So you're not then just like grabbing and shoveling in snacks that are unhealthy throughout the daytime window. It's helpful to have a balance of carbohydrates, so your macronutrients, your carbs, your fats, your proteins, for a few meals of the day, like 3 meals, and then, little snacks between, if that's what your caloric intake shows that you need.
That was where I was going to go next, as a good reminder to people to really also take a look at what types of meals they're eating, what kind of composes those meals.
Yeah.
Because so if someone had questions about that, they say, okay, I'd like to start this. My doctor has cleared me, or I'm seeing maybe a naturopathic
doctor. Yeah.
Where would they get the information on sort of a healthy, like what looks like a healthy meal, or what your meals should be, like what that should look like throughout your day to help support this whole process?
I like to use the visual using your fists. So like each meal, kind of everybody's fist sizes are different. So I just like to say, show me your fists. And like you look at a plate and you kind of visualize both, like what's going on the plate. So at least 2 fists of, vegetables, green vegetables, and all the rainbow vegetables, 2 fists plus, so as many vegetables as possible. There's no limitations. And then a fist of healthy carbohydrates, which I'll come back to because the carbohydrates you eat do matter. And then a palm of protein. So like kind of circle your palm, and then thumb of fat. So those kind of compromise like a healthy, nice, balanced meal versus just saying, oh, I'm starving and have a bowl of pasta, or a couple slices of toast with nut butter or something like that. So it's helpful to have the balanced meal because then you're getting your micronutrients in addition to your macros, the micronutrients in the vegetables. Now with the carbohydrates, one of the biggest things that I like to say is like, well, what carbohydrates are you eating? So what would be an example of something that would be helpful for, supporting or reducing insulin resistance is choosing carbohydrates that are high in fiber, protein, and not refined. So what group do you think you would be cutting back on in that case?
Breads and pastas.
Yes, breads and pastas. Right. Crackers, cookies, wraps, naans, rotis, anything made from flour. So it's like, kind of limiting your flour. But again, I always say 80-20 rule because, you don't have to be perfectly always 100% no flour, but 80% of the time, limiting or avoiding flour, and then 20% flexibility. And then within that, can you think of some healthy carbohydrates? Because part of the problem is people think, oh, I'm not going to eat any carbs. And then they're hungry for potato chips and refined carbs because they haven't had enough carbs, or they can't do the fasting or cut off. They're starving at night. So what are some healthy carbs that might fill you up?
Well, are lentils a vegetable or are lentils a carb?
So good. Yeah, no, lentils are perfect. So that would be a part of the legume group, and it is a
Yeah.
healthy carbohydrate, and they
Okay.
are low in the glycemic index. So that means that, so glycemic index is basically an index that tells us like how quick food breaks down into sugar in our blood, where glucose was assigned arbitrarily 100, 2 hours after a meal. So that means that when you consume glucose, 2 hours after glucose, it's hot, like 100. And then if you eat lentils, it would have a low glycemic index relative to glucose, meaning it would break down nice and slow. What that means is your pancreas won't be firing out huge amounts of insulin in response to that. And then your receptors are happy and everything's, a happy hormone cascade. So
do you feel more satiated when you eat
yes,
more low glycemic index food?
if the foods are higher in fiber and higher in protein. Yeah, because that's the protein that actually makes you feel full. So lentils are high. And that would be a nice, healthy, let's say you had a salad and you throw on some lentils and then you had a side of salmon, and then to have some fat, you put a little bit of cheese if you're not dairy free, or avocado, olive oil, or tahini onto the onto the salad as your fat.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's really helpful. I think that that's important information for people to hear, that, this is something that we can do. And this intermittent fasting gives people an option for, especially if you are looking to lose weight or balance hormones prior to a cycle. This seems like something that could be a good option for people who are looking to have support in that area.
Yeah, if you have high testosterone and you're trying to kind of calm that testosterone soup, like the excess testosterone, improve your egg quality with you. And if you have PCOS, then reducing your insulin will do that. So fasting can be very helpful, and it can improve your chances of your cycle succeeding. Yeah.
That's amazing. Great.
Yeah, there are certain cases where, I was going to say, there are certain cases you don't want to do intermittent fasting. So in traditional Chinese medicine, we call it yin deficiency. So if a woman's really perhaps a mature woman and she's low body fat and her cycles are shorter, like the last scenario you'd want to do intermittent fasting. If you're trying to get pregnant. So like, in your 40s and you're slim and you maybe have some hot flushes before your period, we call that yin deficient picture in Chinese medicine. If there's a history of eating disorders, so anorexia, or perhaps you have hypothalamic amenorrhea, which is basically when you don't ovulate, not because of polycystic ovary syndrome, but because your body fat's too low to maintain a healthy kind of cascade between your brain and your ovaries. And then women who perhaps over exercise or have low body fat, that kind of thing. So you just have to be cautious about, who's starting this. Yeah, I just wanted to share that.
No, that's really important information. I'm just looking on Facebook. We have a couple of questions that have come in, if I could jump in with one.
Absolutely, sure.
What about metformin and Synthroid? Are those meds that are effective with PCOS? So I know this isn't about intermittent fasting, but it does have to do with PCOS. And I don't know if you're comfortable answering a question.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, absolutely. So metformin is a medication that that can help with insulin resistance. There's some controversies around it. It's myo-inositol can be a safer alternative option to it. Speak to your doctor before you make that shift, but they both help with insulin resistance. The World Health Organization has some general recommendations on polycystic ovary syndrome. Metformin is the gold standard in treatment of women with insulin resistance or type 2 diabetes who has PCOS. It's often used in fertility treatments, even with a woman with PCOS who does not have, officially diagnosed type 2 diabetes. Because again, going background reason that the insulin resistance, even if it's not, like what happens is your sugar levels are kind of controlled at first. So you don't even see the insulin resistance. The sugars look normal. What doesn't show normal is often the fasting insulin, or if you consume that. Have you had children?
Yeah, the drink. Yes.
Yeah. So the sugary, that sugary drink that you eat when you're pregnant and you're like 28 weeks around, and you're trying to determine if you have gestational diabetes. Well, that's called the glucose tolerance test. So the glucose tolerance test is when you get a fasting glucose and then you consume that orange drink, that's glucose awful. So they
Oh, it
taste
is
gross.
awful.
And basically then you check to see what's the glucose response, like how much sugar is in your blood. And if it's out of control, you're diagnosed with gestational diabetes. Well, you can actually non-pregnant test your glucose tolerance test and it might look normal. But if you add on the insulin, it's called the insulin glucose tolerance test. You check fasting insulin and see what your insulin response is. What you'll see is the insulin's really high, but the glucose is normal. So you don't even see that it's creeping.
Okay.
So the reason a doctor might put you on metformin for PCOS when you don't have official type 2 diabetes yet and nothing's showing up in your glucose in your blood is because it can improve your egg quality through the route of reducing testosterone through that insulin resistance. However, there are some side effects associated with it and not that much research associated with healthy, pregnancy. So I'm just cautious and I always kind of turn to myoinositol, nutrition changes, see if you can avoid the metformin. And in terms of thyroid medication, if you are underactive or perhaps your fertility doctor has said, okay, your TSH is above 2.5, then, and it makes sense, or your antibodies are attacking your thyroid, that's absolutely helpful for folliculogenesis, which is what, the development and maturation of your follicles. So, but only then. You don't want to take thyroid medication if you're not underactive. So I'm sure that that person was recommended it by their conventional doctor or the fertility doctor for a good reason.
Yeah, for sure. This is another question. We're not sure if you're able to answer, but it has to do with PCOS and ovarian reserve. But can low ovarian reserve be related to PCOS?
It's actually a really good question that I've pondered on myself in the last few years, because there's been so in order to diagnose PCOS, you have to have 2 of 3 kind of symptom pictures. So a excess number of follicles kind of sitting on the periphery on an ultrasound. So like that pearl necklace appearance on ultrasound, or because it's 2 out of 3, excess androgens, so high testosterone, DHEA, any of the androgens, and or like either blood work or clinical manifestations, so acne, hair growth, male pattern thinning, or women pattern thinning on the top of their head, even chest hairs. So like all like clinical signs of excess androgens, and then the irregular menstrual cycles. So delayed ovulation. So cycles more than 35 days apart, less than 21 days apart. So now if you have those 2 out of 3, you have those clinical findings, but then all of a sudden you do an anti-Müllerian hormone blood test and it actually looks low or normal. What I was querying, and I didn't do enough research to get an answer, but I wonder, because usually you would expect a really high anti-Müllerian hormone. Anti-Müllerian hormone is a reflection of your ovary reserve. So it should be more than 10, or at the very least between 6 out of 10, which is kind of like a borderline PCOS picture if you have those other 2 out of 3 symptoms. That's why testing isn't always that helpful, because sometimes it doesn't match up with the clinical picture. So you got to always go back to the clinical picture as the gold standard for diagnosis rather than blood tests, because sometimes you can have normal testosterone but hair like a beard, so clearly it's like it has more than just the hormone. The blood tests aren't the be all and end all. So what I wondered and queried is if the anti-Müllerian hormone, which is again a reflection of ovary reserve, if that is really low or looking like a low ovary reserve, is that just because maybe all those follicles aren't maturing enough to even produce the anti-Müllerian hormone?
Interesting.
So just a theory. And I wondered, because there's been situations with patients like that. And I thought, that's bizarre. You have clear symptoms of PCOS or a lab malfunction. Like, did they do the test properly?
For sure.
So repeat the test and then, dig deeper.
Okay.
I wish I knew more.
No, that's okay. Thank you for answering those questions. Okay, let's get back to conversation. Anything else that you want to add in? Anything that we haven't touched on that you think is important for patients to know?
Let me think about that. I think one of the big issues often with women with polycystic ovary syndrome is it can be hard to diagnose. A lot of physicians aren't up to speed with how to diagnose it. They get very short education in medical school. So be patient with your doctors. If they refer you to an obstetrician or a fertility specialist or a reproductive endocrinologist or endocrinologist in general, listen, go get the information. Often the treatment is birth control pill, or metformin, perhaps. It's just helpful to know, it's empowering to know that you have PCOS.
Absolutely.
So I think that's, a huge thing, but also to be patient with yourself, be patient with your doctors. I was really late in the game in getting diagnosis. I was 30 years old, a naturopathic doctor, diagnosing other people, not recognizing myself. Yeah. So it's amazing how, like you can have many doctor's visits. Mine was delayed because my doctor didn't even know what to do with the information. So he didn't call me. So I waited a year. I was like, oh, my hormones are fine, but they were off the chart. So it's helpful to be patient. Number one. Number two, join a community like this one, PCOS challenge, join a community of healthy, friendly, positive people to kind of guide you so you don't feel alone in this. And then I think the biggest thing too is just the concept of, a lot of it's diagnosis is when the diagnosis happens, women are told to lose weight. And that's a really hard thing for women with PCOS because their hunger hormones we were talking about are a lot higher. And so we're just want to shovel food, we're starving. And I can tell that myself, I'm different compared to my friends. I could just eat and eat and eat previous to intermittent fasting. So that's one thing that can really help with intermittent fasting. Is just the overeating, and because it helps to regulate those hormones as well. So I know there's a lot that you asked me, is there anything else? But these things all just come to mind. And,
exactly.
Just little things that, yes, weight loss can help, but it's following the tools that will lead to the weight loss, focus less on what your weight is now and the end weight, focus more on the journey, how you feel during the journey, because as long as you're following the tools, the end number doesn't matter. It does help to be excited by improvements, but don't be disappointed if you're not, because often metabolic changes are happening, just like that study I talked about, before you get any results. Physically,
and I think that's important. And you hear that a lot in health and fitness. I have a health and fitness background. That's where I started. And a lot of clients I used to work with that's a frustration. It's a frustration for me. It's a frustration for my family. It's a frustration for friends. I didn't lose weight. I've been working out so much and the scale went up, but focusing on lifestyle changes
rather than,
and being okay with that and saying, okay, I am making positive steps towards a healthy lifestyle.
Yes.
So I can be the best me I can be.
And loving yourself as you are.
Absolutely.
Because stress hormones will literally drive up insulin resistance because they all work together. So if you're stressed about not losing weight, guess what? You're getting more insulin resistance because the cortisol going up, and you're getting more abdominal weight gain, which is a common area for women with PCOS. So just loving yourself, because really what's the point of getting to the end point and not enjoying the journey there?
Absolutely. I think that those are very important messages to reiterate to women and men, no matter where they are in their fertility journey or not, to consider this information as part of your journey towards better health, and hopefully potentially a family, and reach out to your medical professional. If you're interested in learning more, Tanya, can people reach out to you through your Instagram hand? I think it's Instagram that
it's Dr. Tanya Wild and _ND, spelled DRTANYA WYLDE _ND, and Wild Natural Health Team and I'm sure you guys will post it wherever this link is. But then also, if you like hearing me speak, I am doing a podcast with Mary Wong, traditional Chinese medicine practitioner, that's put out every week, and it's embraceyoufirst.com if you want to subscribe to that.
Yeah, it's a great podcast.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I tuned in. Mary, I follow Mary, and I interviewed her a few weeks ago, and so I've been tuning in. Yeah, you guys are doing a great job.
Thank you so much for listening. Awesome. Thanks.
So Tanya, thank you so much for today. I learned a lot. I feel more validated in my own personal journey, so that makes me feel nice. And I hope that everybody watching was able to gain some information. And if it's something that you're interested in learning more about and you'd like to reach out to Dr. Wild, please find her on Instagram, or you can connect with Fertility Matters, and we will make the connection for you. Thank you. On behalf of the board and our all of our team of volunteers, thank you everybody for tuning in. Remember, Fertility Matters Canada is a national charity that provides support, information, awareness, and advocacy for you, the fertility patient. We're here, and if you've got time, we'd love for you to make a donation to our charity so we can continue these education sessions for you for free. We'll see you next week on another session of Figuring Out Fertility. Thanks, Tanya. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.